The following program is rated T for teen for the use of tools and materials that can be harmful to unsupervised usage. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, Mr. Waugh here from Mr. Waugh Media, and yes, that is my actual name. You should know it by now. This is episode 12, and the season finale of our first season. We want to thank you guys for sticking around. Hope you guys will enjoy season 2, and on that note, we're going to take it back, and we're going to show you how to paint adventurers. That's right, 12 episodes, and we couldn't have done it without all of you guys and your continued support. Now, I know the quality's kind of done a couple dips here and there. Unfortunately, in the beginning, it was Mia and I working on this, but due to Nurgle's rot, I can't even say the word or YouTube's going to come down on me. I've had to run this show solo for a while, and it's on slightly out-of-the-date equipment. It's not the same having just one person doing all the work. It really helps having that extra pair of hands, so we appreciate you guys sticking with us through this whole time, but some good news. Mia and I are both going to go back to work very soon, so we'll be back together. We'll start filming season 2, and it's not just going to be the tutorials. We're also going to throw a little bit extra bonus stuff in there, you know. We really enjoy working on the show, and we hope you guys will as well. So, what am I going to do for the season finale? We were thinking of maybe something really big and grand, like we could do a castle. Shouts out to Owen. I know he wants to see that. That's coming. We're working on some details. But at the same time, I want to take it back. What was this show all about? It was about you guys. It was about customers coming in and enjoying the tabletop miniatures. It's parents and their children painting models for the first time. It's these beautiful couples that come in and they're bonding over something like Dungeons and Dragons. I remember back when I was in high school, I got bullied for playing D&D and playing Warhammer, and I wasn't really allowed to be a nerd. It was looked down on very heavily. Now it's accepted, and we get these amazing people that come in with their stories, and it's just this fantastic feeling that it's come a long way. It's come out of the closet, so to speak, being a nerd. So one of the things I get asked a lot is, how do I paint this? I don't feel I'm good enough of an artist to paint a model. I beg to differ. I think if you just practice it and you have a clear tutorial, you guys can pull off some great stuff. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're taking it back to the basics. Let's show you how to paint a basic adventurer. Let's do green cloaks, some brown robes, different skin colors, and maybe some basic magic effects, some metals. We're going to show you how to do the basics. And from there, you can only grow as an artist. So let's get started.
The first piece that we're going to work on is an average green traveler's cloak. For this one, I'm taking a generic green color and dry brushing it side to side across the surface. This will leave some natural shadows in the cloak itself, and I'll of course do the inside as well. So you can see here, I'm going side to side, up and down when it comes to the hood, to leave those natural shadows behind, like so. Now this is a relatively straightforward cloak. If there's one that has a little bit more flair to it, like this following piece for the sorceress, I'm going to do the same technique but go a little bit wider with my brush strokes. That way I'm leaving those shadows behind in between each of the crevices. Like so. For the next layer, we're going to take 3 parts green to 1 part white to make a lighter color, and we'll dry brush that across the surface, leaving the shadows alone as before. Now, in theory, if you're doing multiple models, part of a regiment perhaps, you might want to get pre-made paints that already are in the shades you need. However, for this one, since they're one-off adventurers, I'm not too worried about the consistency. In fact, all we're going to do is just keep adding more and more white to the mix to get a lighter and lighter color as we progress. At this point, we're using 2 parts green to 2 parts white to make a medium green color. And as the colors are getting progressively lighter and lighter, so too are my brush strokes. At this point, you want to just lightly be kissing the edge of the cloaks. Now this is going to leave behind those previous colors we've already laid down, so it's getting darker and darker as you look into the crevices, whereas the raised areas of the cloak are getting progressively lighter and lighter. Now, you can end this at any point. If you see a cloak that you're like, yes, I think that is the tone that I'm looking for, great, you can finish. But if you want to keep adding more and more white paint to the mix, you'll get a progressively brighter and brighter cloak. Now, this will look great on elven characters, for example, but if you're trying to go for a more realistic, maybe gritty ranger-like character, almost like an Aragorn, maybe you might want to stop about halfway through this to give it a more realistic looking cloak. I might even recommend mixing a little bit of brown in your first batch instead of using pure green, so you have a more rustic kind of looking cloak to build off of. While I was waiting for the cloak to fully dry, I decided I kind of wanted to work on this elven character's hair. So, first layer I did was the black primer and then a base coat of brown over top. That gives us a solid foundation to work off of. Now I'm using some golden yellow and dry brushing that across the entire surface where her hair is. Now don't be afraid to show a little bit of the roots underneath. There'll be a little bit of the brown showing through, but that's okay. If we had just painted it as one mono color of yellow, it just looked like a blob sitting on this woman's head. This way, at least there's contrast, there's depth to it. It'll make it look like there's multiple strands tucked behind her ear and the pigtail, etc. You can't really see it on this camera angle, and I apologize, but trust me, it's there. Next up, we're going to use a layer of just Sunburst Yellow. It's a very bright color, and we're going to dry brush that across all the raised areas, especially going down the ponytail. Just be careful when you're using it around her face. We don't want to get it too much on the cheeks or anything like that, but we will be painting over that, so don't worry about it too much. I'll try to get a zoom in here, but again, it's not really the nicest camera shot. But you can still see there's some of those areas that are brown underneath, showing the nice contrast between that and bright yellow. The cloak itself looks really good at this point, but I want to add a little bit of extra elements to it. This is a powerful sorceress after all. We got to make her have a little bit more pizzazz. So what we're going to do is take a very fine brush and do a thin line along the edge of the cloak with some cream bone color. This is just going to make the whole thing pop out. And don't let this intimidate you at first. If you want, grab yourself a thin piece of cardboard and try to draw along the edge of it and keep it consistent. Do that several times until you feel comfortable running it along the length of this model. Now, it doesn't need to be anything complicated. This is, again, just a simple line drawn. But if you want to take it further, you can do thorns coming off of it. You can have little triangles. You could do little sigils along the way. Or you can just do a nice thin line that'll make this whole thing pop out like this. And that is the generic green cloak. Nothing really complicated in there except for maybe some of the detail work with the outer line. You can use this on tunics, you could use it on pants, on jackets, on, well, cloaks like this. And I think it really pops out. It's not overly complicated, and you should be able to bang this out relatively quick with a little bit of practice. Next up, we're going to start working on some brown cloaks. For this one, we'll take 1 part black and 1 part brown to make a dark chocolate color, and we'll dry brush that across the entire surface. Now, just like the green cloak, you want to leave a little bit of the shadows behind with this one, although, let's face it, with this dark chocolate color, it might be a little hard to spot them. But trust me, they are there. Next up, we're going to take some generic brown and lightly dry brush that across the entire surface. Now, here's an important tip. Make sure your brush is completely dry. I didn't realize it at the time, but my brush still had a little bit of moisture in it, and it's not dry brushing as clean as I would like it here. Now, I can salvage this, but just that be the warning to you all. Make sure your brushes are dry when you try to dry brush. It's kind of in the name. Breathtaking. Just like the green cloak, we're now going to keep adding more and more white to the mix until we get the desired look for our brown cloaks. Now, this is totally up to you how far you want to take it. If you go with, say, a darker chocolate color and maybe 1 layer of brown, might be for a dark cultist of some sort. Maybe use a couple layers with the white to do a Jedi robe. Or maybe you go very, very light to the point that you're doing some sort of a deserty kind of flowing robe. Totally up to you how far you take it. I'm going to keep adding more and more white to the mix. At this point, I'm probably doing 2:2 ratio with the brown and the white respectively, and I'm going to keep dry brushing that across the surface. And we'll see what we come up with here. At this point, I think I'm relatively satisfied with this particular color. It kind of gives us the friar tuck, the generic monk kind of look here. And yeah, I think we can build off of this. So I think it's time to go into some detail work. First up, we're going to use that creamy bone color that we used previously along the elven cloak. And this is, well, going to be used on pretty much everything. We'll use it for the pages in the book, we'll use it on the belt, we'll use it for the rosary beads, the strap on the satchel that he's got slung over his shoulder. I'm even going to use it as a base for the skin that's showing. Now this is not usually my go-to tutorial when I'm doing skin. That I'm actually going to mention in a little bit here, and we'll show you step by step how to do it, normal in quotation marks. But this, I think it is actually going to be a nice little quick cheat for me. So I'm going to put it on his face, I'm going to use it on his hands, and this guy's actually barefoot, so I'll put it down there as well. Overall, this creamy bone is a pretty good generic color, and you can use it for, I think, a lot of different fantasy elements. Because this particular model is just basically 50 shades of brown, we're going to add something to sort of break it up a little bit. The skin color is the bright focal point. The cloak is the normal brown focal point. I want something that's a little bit darker as well. So I went back to that dark chocolate brown we had previously. I'm applying it across the entire staff to give a nice little bit of contrast. To add just a little bit more contrast, we're also going to throw in some olive green on his holy book to break it up a little bit more and add just a little splash of color. Once that's out of the way, I'm going to take some generic white and lightly dry brush that along the pages of the book to really make them all pop out. At the same time, I'm also going to use the same white on the raised parts of the belt, the rosary beads, and I'm also going to put a little bit along the strap for the satchel, just to really give it a nice highlight. Like so. Alright, we're going to wrap this model up with the final layer of skin color. For this one, it's called Basic Skin Tone from Vallejo Paints, and we'll dry brush that across the face, the hands, and the feet. Now, as I said, this isn't my normal go-to. I will show you guys in a minute how to do it, but you know what? This was a pretty good, cheap alternative, and I'm relatively satisfied. And with that, we are now finished our brown cloaked monk. This is a good technique you use for trousers, for a tunic, for a cloak, or a billowing cape. It's a good generic brown color to use for all your fantasy needs. It is now time to start working on the metallic areas. We're going to do the shield, the helmet, the armor, and the weaponry. For this one, it's called gunmetal, and different brands will have different labels for it. Citadel calls theirs lead belchers, others will call it blasted steel. Whatever the name may be, just find a gunmetal that you think works for you and dry brush that over a dark surface to get that effect. Once that's out of the way, we're going to go back in with a lighter silver or a steel color. Some might call it a mithril. Whatever the name is, find the one that works for you. That's going to add a little bit of pizzazz to the armor. Once you dry brush that over the gunmetal, you'll get an effect like this. Gives you a nice shining metal look. The nice thing about this model is, it's basically just a skeleton in a suit of armor, so 90% of our work is already done. But I really want something that'll make this guy stand out on the battlefield, so I figured a bright crimson robe, that's definitely going to add a little pizzazz to this guy. So for this one, we're taking a crimson red and we're going to dry brush that side to side across the cloak, just like we did for the green cloak and just like we did for the brown cloak. And you'll get something that looks a little bit like this. While the silver armor does certainly look good, I think we need to add a little bit more bling to this guy. So I'm going to add a lot of gold highlights to it. Now, to start using gold colors, you first need to start with a bronze or a copper tone, and you're going to put that underneath as your base layer. So for this one, it's called Warplock Bronze from Citadel Paints. I'm going to put that along the edge of the shield, I'm going to use it on the pauldrons, I'm going to use it on the hilt of the sword, and the horns on his Viking helm. And then, afterwards, we'll go over with some different colors to really make it pop out. In theory, we could just leave it like this. It'll give it a nice muted color. For something maybe like a Roman legionnaire, I might keep it something simple like this. But I figured this guy, you know, he used to be an adventurer. Look at that red cloak. He's seen some things. So he deserves to have the finest gold bling I can find. And that is going to come in the form of Guinness Gold from Citadel Paints. This has almost like a cartoonish look to it. It looks like a fake gold. It's not practical, it's not realistic, but you know what? This guy, he deserves it. A bright crimson cloak, Guinness Gold highlights to really make it pop out. This guy was living at large before he died to a level 1 potted plant in a dungeon. What a boss. What a Chad. That was my character, wasn't it? Well, because this guy is technically dead, we should probably do something about his face, or lack therefore of. So I went back in and filled the whole skull in with just a generic black, let that fully dry, and now we're going back in with a creamy bone, and we're going to lightly dry brush that across all the raised areas, leaving the sockets and the mouth alone. Once that is fully dried, we'll go back in with some generic white and do the exact same thing, but this time even lighter and focusing more on the raised areas of bone, such as the cheeks. Now, I know you can't really see it, but yeah, just trust me. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Looks amazing. It's now time to finish off that bright crimson cloak that we were working on previously. For this next layer, we're going to take a blood red and dry brush it across the entire surface of the cloak. We'll also do the same to his loincloth and the bright gemstone that's in the middle of his shield. This is going to make the whole thing just pop out, and it's really going to make him the envy of all of his friends. You know, if he had any friends, but being dead kind of throws a wrench in your social life. But with the model all finished now, we're going to go back in with a wash. My go-to is, of course, Agrax Earthshade. It's just a nice neutral color, and it's going to add all the natural highlights and shadows. But if you have another one, Army Painter has a bunch of different dips and tones that you can use. Vallejo's in the same category. Or you can just water down some black or brown and slather that on your model. Whatever works for you, I think the model is now done. Alright, as promised, we're now going to start working on some skin tones. You're going to want to start with 1 part black and 1 part brown to make a dark chocolate color, and dry brush that across the entire surface. And this is a good launching point for pretty much any skin tone that you're going to work on, whether it be something really dark like an African American, or something lighter like a Caucasian. Now, if you're going to do African American, for example, you're going to want to dry brush just some generic brown over the surface. Maybe add a little bit of brown to your black mix and keep on making it progressively lighter and lighter with each layer. Once that's all done, you're going to give it a nice wash of black ink over the entire surface, and that should be adequate to getting that full look. Now, unfortunately, I went a little bit too heavy with the brown. I didn't dry brush it on there, but you kind of get the image of what I'm going for here. Now, again, just experiment with adding a little bit more black and brown to your pigments until you get the right shade of what you're looking for. Now, if you want to do something a little bit more fantasy-based, we're going to use something called Light Orange from Vallejo, and we'll dry brush that over the dark chocolate mix. And this is a good launching point if you want to do some sort of a creature, like a zombie, or some sort of a mutated ganger from the underworld kind of thing. And you can experiment with different washes and inks to give different skin colors and burns. But if you want to go for more Caucasian, you're going to do a second layer now that's called Salmon Rose, also from Vallejo. And you're going to lightly dry brush that across all the skin areas. Once again, you're going to be getting lighter and lighter with every layer that you're doing, so this one should be a medium to light dry brushing across the surface. And you'll get something that looks a little bit like this. Now, again, you could be satisfied with this and you can call it a day, but if you want to take it one step further, maybe for someone that's almost albino or maybe elven, you're going to do one final layer, and it's called Basic Skin Tone, also from Vallejo. And this is usually the one that I will go with, because once this is done, you can go back with some Agrax Earthshade and put that over the skin, and it'll just give it a nice final look. But we've now given you a couple different choices, and the decision's up to you of what you want this to look like. Just do a bit of experimentation, and eventually you'll find what works for you best. Last but not least, I'm going to show you how to do a basic spell effect. We're going to do Glowing Blue. For this one, we'll take a black prime model and dry brush blue across the outer surface. Now, you could use the same technique with, say, some greens. All we're basically going to be doing is taking the primary color and continuously adding more and more layers of white to the mix and dry brushing that on. Now, the only one this doesn't work for is reds, because obviously if you add white to that, it's just going to become pink. So I guess in theory you could do a nice pink spell effect. But to do a really nice glowing red, that's going to be more involved with yellows and oranges, and that's probably going to be an upcoming video. But for now, glowing blues / glowing greens will be what we're showing here. The next layer is going to be 3 parts of the primary color, so in this case blue, and 1 of white. And we're going to dry brush that lightly across the surface. Just like before, the more white that we add to the mix, the lighter my dry brushing is going to be. Now, I'm also going to be focusing on more of the raised areas as every layer goes on. At this point, we're doing 2 parts white to 2 parts blue, and I'm focusing on sort of like the raised tentacles of this creature. It's called a blue horror, by the way, from the Warhammer universe, and it's just basically a creature of pure magic. So I want to focus on the tentacles, sort of the raised parts of its face, some parts of the hands, the knuckles, but you can see that we're still leaving a little bit of the dark blue behind. At this point, I'm doing 3 parts white to 1 part blue, and again, focusing on those raised areas. If you use this effect on, say, a sword blade, it's going to give it a glowing effect. That's how I do my lightsaber effects, my power swords, or a mythical ruin-encrusted blade for a fantasy world. Same technique, just lightly dry brush it across the entire surface. For your final layer, you want to go in with basically pure white, and this is a light dusting. And you're going to use it only on the utmost raised areas. So, like again, the knuckles, the tentacles, the raised part of its brow. On the blade, you would use it along the outer edges to really make it like a highlight, if you will. And that's it. It's a basic effect, and you can get something like this. It's exactly the same technique on a much larger scale, and I think that looks pretty cool for a final boss in the dungeon. And that's it. That's how you do glowing blue. It's relatively straightforward. Once you're completely satisfied with how the model turned out, it's now time to base it. For me, that's just some simple glue and a little bit of sand, and then give it ample time to dry. Once that's out of the way, I prime the entire piece black, and then I'll start going in with dry brushing some brown. Sometimes I might go in with some dark chocolate first, kind of like I did with the robes, but for this one, we're just going to use generic brown and dry brush that across the surface. Once that layer is completely dried, I'll go in with 1 part brown and 1 part golden yellow to make that sand color that I'm so fond of in all my videos. I'll dry brush that across the surface as usual and give that plenty of time to dry as well. Next up, I've added 1 part white to that previous mix, making it lighter and lighter. You know the drill, lighter brush strokes, yada yada yada. Insert paint drying joke here, and voila. You got something that looks something like this. Once the paint is fully dried, we're going to go in and do a final layer of flock. For this one, we'll take some basic white glue and we'll add little droplets across the base. Then, taking a small popsicle stick, we'll spread it to give it sort of a random Rorschach's kind of pattern across the surface. Then, after dipping it in the flock, we'll dust off the excess amount. You'll have something like this. And that's it. We have a finished model.
Well, that's been today's episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Maybe found some useful information in there. If you did, make sure you hit the like, the share, subscribe down below, and please, please pass this around to all your friends. We're really trying to build this from the ground up. And it's because of people like you, we're starting to get played down in the States, across the pond in the UK. We're slowly building this channel up. So thank you guys so much for that. Now, if there's anything that you, yes, you watching right now, if you want me to build something really cool, put it down in the comments down below, and maybe we'll be able to get to it on an upcoming episode. On that note, I've been Mr. Waugh from Mr. Waugh Media, wrapping up Season 1. We're going to get refueled, re-energized, and we're going to bring out Season 2 very soon. So we'll catch you then. Good night.
Am I here for a reason? please tell me